Kia ora, my name's Michaela, and I wrote this book, Ascension, when I was 16 years old, and I haven't read it since then, so read along with me as I figure out if it is cringe or creative. Today we are reading chapter 3. This one's going to be another long one, so I might do it in 2 parts. So this is chapter 3, part 1. Chapter 3, New. I shot bolt upright in my bed, screaming. I screamed until I ran out of air. I was screaming before I even knew why. When I stopped, the air around me felt empty. I felt water dripping down my cheeks rapidly. Trying to gather my thoughts, I focused on breathing. In and out. In and out. Out and in. No, that's wrong. Why would my heart slow down? Without thinking, my hand shot up to my neck and then down to my stomach. It felt like an automatic reaction, one I did not recognize. Shaking my head, I tried to remember what I saw. Images flashed through my brain. A man was shouting at me, the words in a language I didn't understand. I remembered a sharp blow across my cheek and a voice through a closed door. There was a beautiful face looking at me, of all people. Everything felt fine when I remembered this. But the images got more violent. I remembered the blood, the piercing feeling in my stomach. I felt like screaming again, but there was no reason to. The pain I had felt was no longer there. I was just remembering. But it was so vivid. Words rang in my head, but what did they mean? It was so foreign I couldn't understand anything. Not a single word of it, at least not to me. I could feel it all fading as soon as I started to remember. My eyes opened as if they expected to be back in that room, but I knew I wasn't. I was lying on my double bed, still fully clothed. Cold air was wafting through the open window, and the water running down my cheeks wasn't water at all, but tears. I couldn't remember why I was even crying in the first place. I couldn't remember why I had woken up. My head started to spin. I couldn't even remember what room I had expected to be in. What was happening? Moments took away memory, piece by piece, until it was all gone. I didn't understand, but then again, there was no reason for me to feel so frustrated. After all, it was just a dream, wasn't it? A dream I no longer remembered. I had been asleep and then I woke up screaming. It was a nightmare. I had woken from a nightmare. That seemed plausible. It was so real. Everything looked so vivid. I knew that for certain. And all that I touched was as real as the room in which I sat now. How could it have been a dream? I felt too much like No, that was ridiculous. Of course it was a dream. I let myself forget it all, and instead I tried to remember more important things, like what my name was and what time it was and where I was at the moment. It was dark, so it was probably either very late at night or very early in the morning. I wiped away the tears with my sleeve and tried to pull myself together. My stomach rumbled and growled, an aching hunger setting in. My body was telling me how hungry it was. I groaned with it as I moved off the bed and attempted to stand. I managed to do this with only a small wobble. Looking around with a shiver as the wind breezed past me again, I could see something appetizing in front of me. A small plate of cheese sandwiches and a tall glass of chocolate milk sat on my bedside table. Immediately after spotting it, I walked over to it and grabbed a sandwich, taking a large bite out of it. The food felt so good as I chewed and swallowed it down. Finishing it in a matter of minutes, I picked up the piece of paper next to it and it was addressed to me, taking a sip of milk along with it. I opened it, squinting in the dark to try and read it. Jane's handwriting was scribbled along the sheet of neatly folded paper. Hey, Mer, you look so peaceful, so I decided not to wake you. If you're really hungry, we left your dinner in the fridge. You just have to heat it up. Your uniform is dry cleaned or ready for tomorrow. I put it in your closet. I'll wake you up at 6:30 and I can drive you to school if you want. You won't know where the school is yet. We were going to give you the second part to your prezi at tea, but you were asleep, so I left it on your dressing table to open. Hope you like it. Get some rest, okay, Mer? You've got a big day tomorrow. Love, Jane. I folded the page back up and placed it back where it had been left for me to find. I polished off the milk and sandwiches too hungry to sit down and eat comfortably. My shivering became more and more frequent from the cold winter's air that rushed past me. I did not, however, remember opening the window. Maybe Jane did it to let some cool air in. I wasn't too bothered with that now. Instead, I thought about the things Jane wrote in the letter. She'd said my uniform was hanging in my closet. Opening one of the doors to my closet, reaching my hand in, feeling around for something that vaguely felt like clothing. Finally feeling it, I pulled the uniform out by its hanger and looked it over. On the hanger hung a black blazer with a red-lined collar and 3 neat buttons down the front. Hung beneath it was a black pleated skirt and a white long-sleeved button-up shirt. A red tie hung over the front of the blazer, which perfectly matched the colour of the small red stitched crest on the pocket. Was the icon of St. Catherine's College, and on this icon was the letters S and C stitched either side of 2 crossed over red and black flowers. I assumed they were roses. It certainly looked fancier than my old uniform back in Waimate. I hung the uniform up in the closet again. As I hung the uniform back up, I noticed my school shoes sitting on the floor inside the closet. They were small and shiny with black buckles. How did they even know my sizes? I didn't think even Luke knew. They were certainly going all out on the godparents' front. I could give them that much at least. Wondering how short the skirt was, I realized that it was much shorter than the one I had worn at Waimate High. And of course I didn't want to stand out too much tomorrow. I decided that while I was awake, I would unpack my clothes to feel more at home. But before I could even get to my suitcase, the sound of my window's open shutters flinging against the window frame made me jump. The wind had blown it shut unsuccessfully, creating a loud sound before flying back open to where it had been before. I made my way over to it, leaning on the seat, reaching out to pull the handles forward. But something caught my eye, a sparkle in the dark above, and I couldn't help but glance up. I froze, staring at the moon. It was so clear tonight, not a single cloud spoiled it. The full moon was perfectly round, shining white light down onto me. It made me forget all about how tired, cold, and hungry I was, and I just gazed up at it for what must have been hours. It's easy to think you're the biggest thing in this world when you walk through life. It is until you look up at the sky and see how big it is compared to you. It didn't make me feel empty or small when I saw it, which was surprising. For some reason, it made me feel mostly in awe, but also sort of ready. For the first time in my life, I felt ready for it. I didn't exactly know what it was, but it didn't really matter because I was at ease, content. I was content to let life happen, to let my life happen, no matter what horrible nightmares I woke up screaming from, or whether I could remember them. I was ready. By the next morning, I had other things on my mind, and therefore I didn't really think about the previous night. Everybody was in a rush to get out the door. Jane had woken up late, and the only thing that didn't make her even later for work was me. Before I had gone to bed, I'd unpacked my alarm clock and set it for 6 o'clock, just in case. Jane was a lawyer, working for a local practice. She had to be at work by 7:30, but unfortunately for me, school didn't start until 8:30, so I was quite early to arrive. She dropped me off out front after giving me directions to the main office for my enrolment. I was standing outside the front gate, which reads St. Catherine's High School. St. Catherine's College is what I called it before. I've already forgotten the name of the school. I'm just going to call it St. Catherine's College. I was standing outside the front gate, which read St. Catherine's College, when I looked down at my new school uniform. Jane had told me how she had hemmed up the skirt because to her it was way too long. Her version of way too long was very different to mine. Anything longer than this would have been much better. It wasn't that I was a miniskirt hater, it was just that I knew what first impressions were like, especially in high school, and I didn't want to be noticed because my skirt was shorter than most others. There were moments like this one when I wondered if Jane was more of a teenager than me. I walked towards the main office to sign in. The school wasn't as big as I thought it would be. It seemed like an average high school. After a while, I wouldn't get lost as easy, but right now getting lost was the only thing I could do. Even after getting more directions, I still couldn't find it until after nearly half an hour of searching. I walked along the cement path across from the field and headed towards the door I had been looking for. It had a sign that read "Main Office," so I thought I had it right this time. I had probably walked past it about 7 times without looking properly. I told myself it was okay because most of the buildings looked the same. They were red brick with wooden doors and blue windows. It seemed to have this decor emanating the whole property. The school didn't look relatively new, or at least well looked after. Burn, because I literally based the visual of that on my high school. Anyway, the cold air was giving me goosebumps along the back of my exposed legs. Even my knee-high white socks couldn't shelter this kind of cold. What should I expect? It was in the middle of June. I, I also changed the time because didn't I say earlier that it was October? There is some consistency. So let's go with June, seeing as it's winter. It's June at the moment. Happy Pride. What should I expect? It was the middle of June. I welcomed the inside heating of the main office as I stepped in. There was a large round black desk on the side of the wall, and a small squat woman with curly blonde hair and horn-rimmed glasses sat behind it. She was sitting in front of a computer typing, too busy to hear me enter. My new shoes tapped on the flat floor as I paced towards her desk. I looked at the names up on the walls as I walked, plaques of all the head girls and boys and all the high achievers that had been to the school here hung like shining suns in the dark room. Oh my god. Gold, silver, and bronze awards given for things like first under 16 netball and winner of the Brimshire Award. I looked back at the office lady whose name badge read Miss Deacon. She was still staring at her computer screen, which reflected off the lenses of her glasses, when I was finally standing in front of her. Now that I was closer to her, I could see that she must have already been here for a while. She looked well past retirement age. Um, Hi, I'm starting today, and I was told I had to sign in before my first class. My voice pierced the emptiness around the room, making me jump. Her head snapped up at the sound, smiling warmly. The smile revealed her crooked brown teeth and untidy maroon lipstick. Of course, she said with a formal tone. I just need your name, dear. Um, Maribel Porter. As soon as I had replied, she started typing, what I could only assume was my name, into the computer. She then pushed her chair using the edge of her desk backwards and towards the printer behind her. Once she had, she stood up to retrieve 3 pieces of paper. She walked back to me in a proficient posture, not moving her eyes from the papers she was holding. Placing them on the desk in front of me, she politely pointed to where I should sign my name and gave me my timetable, locker number, planner, and library card. Here we go, she stated, making sure to slam the cabinet shut violently after filing my papers in it. And here are your school textbooks and a list of what exercise books you'll need. Okay, thank you, I said, looking over the list quickly. I put my things in my bag, fumbling, trying not to drop anything already inside it. I heard a thud when I thought I could zip it up. I had dropped my new sleek black cell phone that I was given by Jane and Eli. You know you're not allowed those during school time, she said, pointing at my phone with a stern look on her face. I immediately blushed, looking back at her apologetically. I'm sorry, it's new, and I I didn't know I wasn't allowed it at school. She interrupted my stuttering with what sounded like a forced laugh. I sighed in relief, then I realized she wasn't serious. Something about breaking school rules made me nervous. No one likes to be told off, especially on their first day. Don't worry, it's your first day. I won't take it off you, she assured me. Don't look so worried. We don't give out detentions for dropping your cell phone. She laughed again at her own joke as she turned back to the computer, shuffling out of the door and turning my phone off anyway. I made my way blindly around the school. The cold atmosphere was biting my legs again while I walked fast towards a seat in the middle of the courtyard. I sat on the wooden bench that circled all the way around a huge oak tree. I sighed, looking around at my new school. There was only a few teachers arriving now, let alone the students. I definitely was early. I jumbled through the things in my bag, getting out my school planner to find out the school times, to find out my class times. I found that you weren't meant to arrive until 8 a.m., and it was only about a quarter to. I look away. I, I, I must look way too over-eager. I put the planner back in my bag and found my timetable. I had English first, and a teacher called Miss Rowland. I didn't mind teachers that much, as long as they weren't too dull or boring. I didn't have a very high attention span when it came to teachers telling you the same thing over and over, but I wasn't a rebel, nor was I a teacher's pet. I did my work and I got on with things, letting myself blend into the background if I could. I shivered again and attempted to pull my skirt over my knees for some small comfort, but of course failing dismally at this. I silently wondered if people would notice it too much, and therefore notice me. Would everyone look at me and think I was some sort of preppy dresser? I didn't really like to think of myself that way. Usually people's opinions didn't bother me, but I didn't want to gain a reputation if I was going to be here until I graduated. It would just be easier if I just blended in. Figuring that if I was so early I may as well be doing something productive, I removed my copy of Jane Eyre from my bag and started to read. I was just up to the bit where Jane's childhood friend dies, when a voice in front of me made me jump, immediately pulling my mind out of the book and back into reality. I'm confused, the voice said with a touch of sarcasm. It made me gasp in shock, quickly looking up to see a Year 12 boy standing over me with a teasing look on his face. He had his hands in his pockets and he wasn't wearing a blazer. Oh God, sorry. You just scared me, I trailed off into a whisper. Pulling myself together, I could feel myself blush at my overreaction, and made sure to avoid eye contact until he talked again. This time, his tone was slightly apologetic. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, he said, smiling at me friendly. Oh, that's okay, I laughed nervously and looked back at him. He was one of those blonde-haired, blue-eyed guys who made girls swoon over them simply by walking past. I knew his type. They seemed pretty predictable. I could see from the look on his face that he was trying not to laugh at me. Did he have to make it so obvious? What did you say? I asked him, slightly confused. His first words to me didn't seem to make sense. Oh, I was just going to say that I'm a little confused because you don't look like a nerd, he said, chuckling at me and pointing to my book. I know he didn't mean it as an insult. He was probably even flirting with me, but I was a little offended. It gave me a jolt of confidence. I was never a big fan of stereotypes. So reading a book automatically makes me a nerd, does it? I said with a smile, so that it didn't sound too nasty. I shoved the book in my bag and slung it around my shoulder. He sat down as I spoke, and didn't seem that surprised at my angry reply. No, I just mean that you don't see so many girls around here reading in the middle of school, he replied, gesturing to the students standing around the courtyard. That's all. There were heaps of students at school now. Most of them were in groups, standing around, giggling, talking to each other. There were heaps of students at school now. Most of them were in groups, standing around, giggling or talking to each other. My skirt didn't look that much shorter than most of the other girls, and I wasn't surprised to see that, unlike me, most of the other girls layered on makeup and had replicated hairstyles. No one seemed to notice me sitting here by myself except for this guy. I wondered why he had noticed me, of all people. Was he just being friendly, or was he being dared to talk to the new girl by his idiot friends? I watched him curiously as he smiled at me with with a full amount of confidence. So far, I was betting on the latter. I'm Blake, by the way, he said, smoothing back his messy blonde hair. He was quite attractive in that boyish way, and quite tall, but not lanky. He managed to look casually cool without screaming troublemaker. I started to realize that he was expecting me to say something. He must have meant this as an introduction, as a signal for me to do the same. I quickly hoped it didn't look like I was checking him out, but before I could answer his expression, he got impatient and did it for me. He said, "You must be the new girl." I frowned at the question because it sounded like I was expected, either by him or possibly even the whole school. "What do you mean, the new girl?" I asked, bemused. He read my tone quickly and he realized I was onto him. Yeah, I heard you were coming to town through my dad." His eyes were searching for a good way to explain. Once he noticed that, he said, "What?" Once he noticed what he said, he shook his head and said, "I mean, my dad heard it from Eli, your godfather. They're good friends." So Eli had sent someone to spy on me, or at least force some poor guy to be friends with me. Did I really worry him that much? I smiled back at Blake. The poor guy. That's how he noticed me. I was the new girl. "Oh, I see," I said, trying not to sound too amused. "You don't have to talk to me just because you know my uncle," I said. I had to let him off the hook. I wanted to make friends but that's just it. I wanted to make friends. I didn't need any outside help. I didn't need anyone making them for me. I couldn't hang out with someone who was only doing it to be polite or as a favor to someone else. He looked at me surprised at my change of tone and quickly tried to take back what he said. "No, that's not the reason I mean. I'm not talking to you just because my dad knows your uncle." He started trying to change the direction of our conversation. "Look, I'll tell my godfather you talked to me, all right? I'm not going to force you to be my friend," I said, trying to sound kind and understanding, but it came out as an accusation. I smiled kindly at his perplexed face and stood up to walk away, but he grabbed my arm before I could get very far. "Wait," he stopped me. I looked at his hand and closed around my wrist, pointedly. He quickly let go, holding his hand up in a sort of surrender. "He didn't tell me to talk to you, if that's what you think. I came over to talk to you because you looked," he hesitated, "like a nerd, loner, loser." I folded my arms and waited for his response, making sure to arrange my expression to look unimpressed. I wanted to hear what he was going to say. I was completely intrigued, but fortunately for him, the bell rang, and we both stood up automatically. Saved by the bell, literally. "What have you got first?" he asked, changing the subject ironically by talking about subjects. Hey, I'm pretty funny. I decided to let him change the subject because he did look slightly awkward at what he had almost said. Um, English, I recited from memory, trying to remember where it was on the map on my diary. I didn't want to have to look at it again. Then I would really look like a nerd. "Who was your teacher for it?" "Miss Rowland," I replied. "Oh, you're year 11, he realized. It was slightly flattering when he looked genuinely disappointed. He must have been older than me, then I figured. "What are you?" I asked curiously. "Year 12, he said quickly, moving on. "Then I'll see you at Interville, okay?" I didn't know whether it was a question or a threat. "Yeah, sure," I said, shrugging casually. He beamed at me, teasingly, remembering his confidence. He walked off in another direction, and I tried to make sense of what exactly had just happened. That's when the second bell rang. I was now late to my first class. Great. After finally remembering where it was, I found my English class and opened the door, interrupting something the teacher was telling the class. If there was any doubt in my mind about whether I was late or not, that was now resolved. At first she looked annoyed at my late arrival and then turned her expression into a welcoming smile. I smiled politely back at her and attempted to walk over to a spare desk at the back. "Sorry," I mumbled, trying to hide my embarrassment, but the many faces that had watched my entrance with curiosity. Wait, wait a second," she interjected quickly, so I turned around. She gestured for me to come back to the front with her long pointy index finger extended. I walked up to her, trying to look apologetic. "I'm really sorry. I just got lost, and I was cut off when the class giggled at my answer. She quickly glared at them with her narrow eyes. This made them fall silent almost immediately. After doing this, she turned back to me, a sweet smile on her face. Name? She asked me sternly. Mirabelle Porter, I told her. I watched her tick my name off the roll, glancing up at me when she was done. She quickly turned her gaze towards the class, seeming to be searching for a place for me to sit. After a quick assessment of the class, she faced me and said, "And where are you from, Mirabelle?" "Why, Maddie," I said with a nervous voice. Talking to teachers was so awkward and unnecessary. Why did they do it? I thought it would be just as awkward for them, but obviously it wasn't for her. She nodded at me, interested, and gestured at the desk towards the back of the class. "You can sit with Siobhan at the back. We are just doing a film study on William Shakespeare, Taming of the Shrew." She grabbed a remote on her desk and pressed a button while directing it at the projector hanging from the ceiling. I quickly walked over and sat down at the desk that she had asked me to, getting my books out of my bag and placing them on my desk. I heard her say, "Siobhan, can you make sure to look after Mirabelle today?" I expected a groan of disappointment from the girl sitting next to me, but she simply answered, "Sure," in a small, high voice. I looked at her in slight surprise, and she smiled back at me. Her black glasses framed her bright blue eyes, and she wore a small black headband in her short blonde hair. She had perfectly straight teeth and wore her uniform similar to mine. "Hey, I'm Chev," she said, smiling friendly at me. She pointed to the girl sitting across the other aisle and beside her. She was leaning over her desk to look at us. "That's Tash." Tash waved at me softly and replicated Siobhan's friendly smile. She had yellow-green eyes and reddish-brown hair, which hung long and curly over one of her shoulders in a plait. "And that's Bobby." She pointed to the guy in front of us, who was also leaning over his chair to nod at me and smile. Bobby had freckles on his cheeks and nose, and his brown curly hair complemented his brown eyes that looked kindly at me and Shav, who was now facing me. Also. They were all taking in my appearance. I hoped it was just because I was new and not because I looked horribly ugly. "I'm Mirabelle," I said, smiling back, taking them in as well. They seemed friendly enough. "So why Maddie, huh?" the girl called Tash asked. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "Don't worry, I know it sucks being the new girl. I was the new girl once upon a time too. About 2 years ago. Everyone stares at you." She giggled, still looking at me. At that moment, I thought, I'm going to like Shav. She had a sense of humour. Both her and her friend seemed just as interested in me as I was in them. Bobby and Tash faced the front when the teacher turned the lights off and started the movie. And I will end part 1 there. If you are following along the series, which is honestly no one at this point, but if you are, please comment below on this video. I would love to hear at least one person is listening to me read this book and it's not just going out into the void. You've kind of just met some of the other main characters. It is disjointed. I appreciate that it's been delayed from chapter 1, chapter 2. These are really long to edit and to film. So I appreciate your patience, but again, I feel like nobody's listening, so I'm saying this to no one. Yeah, let me know what you think, and I will have part 2 up shortly of chapter 3. Let me know, did you think this part 1 of chapter 3 was cringe or creative?